The stain on the sheet wasn't a stain. It was thread, copper thread. Kiara Weller folds linens in the basement of St. Vincent. She is black, 27, luminous dark brown skin, an emerald laundry tunic, and her mother's ring on a chain at her throat. 100 squares on a calendar. 100 days since her mother vanished. The police wrote one word and closed the file. Voluntary. My loves, I have pressed sheets for men who owned the floor above me. I know how a basement listens. Then a stitch of copper thread leads her to a room that isn't supposed to exist. Room of a patient named Michael Kwan, and the man in that bed, pale skin, black hair swept back, a dragon inked down the left side of his neck, Kang Min-jae, the snow wolf, a luxury watch on a wrist that couldn't move, a signet ring, a photograph hidden where no nurse would look. Aigu. She should walk away. She counts the squares instead. But what she carried into that room on the 100th day, and the word he whispered when she opened his hand, I still don't have the words for. Stay with me. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The steam press came down, and Kiara held it there 1 second longer than the machine asked for, long enough to feel the heat push through the cotton and into her palms. Then she lifted it, folded the sheet in 3, and set it on the stack that was already taller than her shoulder. 61 sheets since 6 that morning. She counted them the way some people counted breaths. It kept her hands moving and her head quiet, and quiet was the only thing the basement of St. Vincent gave away for free. Down here, there were no windows. Just the low ceiling with its taped pipes, the hum of the industrial dryers, and the fluorescent tubes that turned every white sheet a shade of blue. Kiara had learned the light in 3 years. She knew which tube flickered before it died. She knew that at 11 the boiler kicked, and the whole room shuddered once, like something turning over in its sleep. She smoothed the collar of her tunic, emerald green, buttons down the front, the little badge that read laundry pinned crooked because she'd pinned it in the dark. Her mother's ring hung on a chain under the fabric, warm from her skin. She touched it through the cloth without thinking. She did that maybe 40 times a day. Weller. Marcus leaned in from the sorting bay, a bin balanced on his hip. VIP linens came down early. Han's floor wants them turned by 2. 2. Kiara didn't stop folding. They always want 2. They always get it. He dropped the bin by her station. You good? I'm good. He looked at her the way people had been looking at her for 3 months. A half second too long, waiting to see if the word would crack. It didn't. She'd sanded it smooth by now. Marcus nodded and went back to the sorting bay, and Kiara pulled the first VIP sheet from the bin and shook it out. He was the only one who'd asked, in the beginning, and asked the way that meant it. The rest of the floor had done the quiet math of a coworker's tragedy and moved on by the second week. Kiara didn't hold it against them. Grief was a load nobody else wanted to carry down from your floor. You learned to fold it yourself, small, and set it at the bottom of the stack. The good ones felt different in the hand. Higher thread count, a weight to them. The corners reinforced. These came from the 14th floor, where the rooms didn't have numbers on the doors, only letters, and where a folded towel left crooked could end a career. She'd never been up there. Laundry stayed in the basement. That was the whole architecture of a place like this. The higher you went, the less anyone below you was allowed to exist. She folded. She stacked. She did not look at the clock, because looking at the clock was a thing she'd given up. It was easier to count days than hours. Hours moved wrong, but days she could hold. 98. The number sat behind her eyes all morning. 98 days since her mother had walked out of the apartment on Featherbed Lane and not walked back in. 98 squares on the calendar taped inside Kiara's locker, each one crossed with a single diagonal line, drawn at the end of every shift with the same felt pen so the ink would match. She'd read somewhere that consistency was a kind of prayer. She didn't know if she believed it. She drew the lines anyway. At noon, she took her break the way she always took it. She didn't go to the break room. She went to her locker, opened it, and stood in front of the calendar. 98 squares behind. 2 ahead, blank, waiting. She'd bought it the 3rd week, when the panic had burned down to something colder and more useful. 100-square grid, printed cheap, the kind meant for a child learning to count to 100. She'd chosen it on purpose. 100 was a wall. 100 was the number the detective had put in the air the last time she'd called. "Miss Weller." His voice had been kind and finished at the same time. "Your mother is 52. She has her own bank card, her own phone, no history of harm to herself. There's no sign of forced entry. In cases like this, after a certain point, we have to consider that an adult chose to leave. I'm not saying it's easy to hear. She wouldn't. People do. Not her. We're keeping the file open, but I have to be honest with you about where it stands." Where it stands. He'd said it like a man describing weather, and a week later the letter had come, the one with the word voluntary typed in a box, the box that turned a mother into a statistic and a daughter into a woman standing alone in a basement counting sheets. Kiara opened the small tin she kept on the top shelf of the locker. Inside was a second ring, not the one on her chain, but its match. 2 thin gold bands, her mother's and her grandmother's, the same shop, the same year. Gwendolyn had pressed one into Kiara's hand the morning before she vanished. Just pressed it there, folded Kiara's fingers over it, and said the thing Kiara had turned over 1,000 times since. "If I ever go quiet, baby, you don't chase the noise. You read the thread." Kiara had laughed at her. She remembered laughing. Her mother inspected linens for a living. 30 years running her cloth over hems and seams. A woman who could find a dropped stitch at arm's length in bad light. Quality, her badge said, and she'd worn it like a title. Read, the thread had sounded like her, folksy and sideways, a mother's riddle. Kiara had kissed her cheek and gone to work and thought nothing of it. She thought about it now every hour. She closed the tin. She held the locker door open a moment longer. Taped beside the calendar was a photograph, curling at one corner. Gwendolyn on the front steps of the Featherbed Lane building, apron still on, gray cloth badge catching the sun. She'd worked the last 11 years for a small outfit that inspected linens for restaurants and clinics across 3 boroughs. A woman who'd built a whole life out of finding what other people missed. In the photo, she was mid-laugh, one hand raised against the camera, caught in the second before she could tell her daughter to stop. Kiara had stopped taking the photo down. For the first month, she'd turned it face in, because the laugh was unbearable. Now she needed the laugh. It was proof of a face, and a face was harder for the world to call voluntary. The super's slip was still folded in her tunic pocket, the 3rd one this month. Rent 30 days behind, then 31, the number climbing like the squares on the wall. Her mother's half of the apartment had gone silent, and with it half the money, and Kiara had learned that grief and arithmetic could occupy the same body without touching. She paid what she could. She let the slips stack. She counted sheets. She closed the tin. She closed the locker. She went back to the floor. The afternoon load was heavier. A wedding party had checked out on 11, and the linens came down stained with things that told stories Kiara didn't want to read. Wine, lipstick, one sheet with a long tear someone had tried to not shut. She pre-treated them one by one, working the solvent into the fibers with a brush, her mother's voice threading through the motion whether she wanted it or not. Circular, never back and forth. You break the weave going back and forth. She'd been folding since she was 9, standing on a milk crate at her mother's side in a laundromat in the Bronx, learning to square a corner before she'd learned to spell her own street. That was the thing nobody in the building knew about her. To them, she was a green tunic and a badge. To them, the basement was where clothes went to be fixed, and people didn't. But Kiara had cloth in her blood, the way some families had music, and she could read a fabric the way her mother read one. The grade of it, the hand of it, the small violences done to it that the owner never saw. She just didn't know yet that the reading was about to save her life. What she felt, that afternoon, was only the ordinary ache of a woman doing the one thing that kept her upright. At 4, the machine, 3 stations down, jammed, and everyone drifted toward the noise, and for a few minutes, Kiara was alone with the VIP stack. She reached for the top sheet to check the fold, because a wrong fold on a Han floor came back down with a note, and a note came back down with a name, and she couldn't afford the name to be hers. Not this month. Not with rent 30 days behind and the super leaving slips under her door. She ran her hand along the hem, and her hand stopped. Not because she told it to. Her fingers stopped the way her mother's used to stop, a half-second before her eyes caught up, the body knowing before the mind agreed. Somewhere in the reinforced corner of that sheet, under the standard white machine stitch, there was a second line of thread, finer, deliberate, a thread that did not belong to any hotel in the world. Her mouth had gone dry. She swallowed once and made herself breathe out slow through her nose, the way her mother had taught her to breathe over a stubborn stain, when the temptation was to scrub hard and ruin the weave. Patience was a fabric skill before it was anything else. She turned the corner to the light. Copper, a single run of copper-colored thread, worked into the seam by hand, so small that a person who didn't know cloth would have called it a flaw and thrown the sheet in the reject bin. Kiara did not throw it anywhere. She held it up under the blue tube and felt the floor of her stomach drop away. Her mother finished every inspection the same way. 30 years, every hem she passed as clean, she marked with a private stitch, a signature in thread the color of an old penny, tucked where no guest would find it, so that if a piece ever came back wrong, she'd know it had left her hands right. Kiara had watched her do it 10,000 times. Copper. Always copper. A code she'd worked out in a laundromat and carried into every job since. A woman signing her work in a language only her daughter could read. Her mother had not worked at St. Vincent a single day of her life. Kiara stood very still. Around her, the jammed machine coughed and caught, and someone laughed, and the boiler was minutes from its 4 o'clock shutter, and none of it reached her. She was looking at a stitch her mother had made, on a sheet that had come down from a floor Kiara had never been allowed to see. On the 14th floor, behind a door with a letter and no number. 98 days of quiet, and here, pressed into a hem by a hand she would have known blind, was the thread. You don't chase the noise, you read the thread. Kiara's own hands were shaking now, and she made them stop, because a shaking hand drops things, and she was not going to drop this. She checked the corners. She turned the whole sheet, inch by inch, the way she'd been taught to turn a fabric she suspected of hiding a fault. In the opposite corner, where the second copper line should have closed the signature, the thread simply stopped. Cut. The mark was half finished, begun in a steady hand and abandoned mid-stitch, the needle pulled out before the pattern could close. Her mother never left a stitch unfinished. In 30 years, she had never once, not on a rag, not on a hotel sheet, left a line of thread open. Something had stopped her hand. Kiara set the sheet down flat on the folding table and pressed both palms against it, as if she could feel through the cotton the moment it had happened. She knew this cloth's whole journey now, the way you know a sentence cut off mid-word. Her mother had held this exact corner, had threaded the needle, drawn the first copper line clean, begun the second, and then the thread ended, not tied off, not trimmed, but yanked, the tail of it frayed where it had been pulled through fabric in a hurry or by another hand. Kiara had spent her life learning the difference between a stitch that was finished and a stitch that was interrupted. The fabric told the truth even when the paperwork lied. A hotel sheet that had never met her mother's employer, a signature no forger would know to copy, because only 2 living people knew it existed, and a name typed on a corner tag, waiting for her to read it. You read the thread. Her mother had said it, folding Kiara's fingers over the ring, and Kiara had laughed, and now the laugh in the locker photograph and the copper in the seam were the same voice, 98 days apart, saying the same thing. Something had stopped her hand. Kiara looked at the laundry tag stapled to the corner of the pillow slip that had come bundled with the sheet. A room code, a letter, a set of numbers, a barcode she'd scanned 100 times without reading. She read it now. 14th floor, Suite K, and beneath the barcode, in the small print reserved for guest services, a name that meant nothing to her yet and would mean everything before the week was out. Michael Kwan. Down the row, the machine finally turned over and the room exhaled, and Marcus called her name. Weller, you catch that? And Kiara folded the sheet closed over the copper thread, slow, the way you close something you don't want anyone to see you looking at. Yeah, she said. Her voice came out level. She didn't know how. I caught it. She set the sheet at the bottom of the stack. Not the reject bin, not the return cart, the bottom of the stack, where her own hands would be the only ones to touch it again. Then she drew the felt pen from her tunic pocket, opened her locker, and crossed out square 98. The line came out straighter than the others. Her hand had gone very calm, the way it did only when the rest of her had gone the other way entirely. 2 squares left before the wall. For 98 days, the world had told her a story with the word voluntary typed in a box, and she had folded that story 1,000 times and stacked it and lived beneath it. Now, in her hands, was a different story, written in copper by the only person who'd ever taught her to read. Her mother had been on the 14th floor. Kiara closed the locker. She looked at the ceiling, at the taped pipes running toward the rooms she'd never been allowed to enter, carrying water up to a suite with a letter on the door and a name she'd never heard. Somewhere above her head, a man called Michael Kwan slept between sheets her mother had touched. She was going to find out who he was. She picked up the felt pen again, turned it over once in her fingers, and slid it back into her pocket. Then she went to the terminal at the end of the row, the one that logged every load in and out of the building, and she typed the room code into the search field with a hand that had stopped shaking altogether. The screen took a moment. The dryers hummed. The blue light held, and the list began to load. The list didn't come back the way lists usually did. No neat column of dates and departments, just a header that blinked, then a single line, lot origin, restricted. Kiara read it twice. She'd pulled 1,000 lot records on this terminal. She had never once seen the word restricted. She typed the room code again, 14, Suite K, Michael Kwan. The same line came back, patient and closed. Marcus called something from the sorting bay. She didn't answer. Her thumb was already moving to the second field, the one nobody used, the batch parent field, where a linen's whole history sat if you knew to ask for it. She asked for it. The screen thought about it. Then it opened. 6 deliveries, 6 dates. All of them routed through a vendor she'd never heard of, Meridian Textile Services, and all of them stamped for the 14th floor before they'd ever touch the hotel's own laundry. The linens on the VIP floor didn't come from her basement. They came in clean, from outside, and left the same way. Except one lot had broken the pattern. One lot had come down. She scrolled to it. 3 days ago, a single sheet, flagged for a stain the vendor's own plant couldn't lift, kicked to the St. Vincent basement for reclamation. Her basement, her pile, the one sheet in 100 deliveries that wasn't supposed to be here, and it had landed in her hands, with her mother's thread half sewn into the hem. Kiara sat with that. Behind her the dryers turned. The blue light held its color on the folded stacks, on the backs of her hands, on the small gold ring resting cold against her sternum under the emerald tunic. She pulled the sheet from the bottom of the pile, where she'd buried it an hour ago, and laid it flat on the steel table. The copper stitches ran 4 inches and stopped. Not frayed, not worn through by a machine. Cut. Whoever had interrupted her mother had done it between one stitch and the next, and Gwendolyn had left the needle's path pointing where it always pointed, toward the corner, toward the mark she hid inside the finished seam. There was no finished seam, but there was a start. Kiara turned the hem to the light and found it. 3 tiny knots, close together, the way her mother tied a number when she didn't have room to embroider it whole. Gwendolyn had taught her this at the kitchen table when Kiara was 9, both of them squinting under the bad bulb. 1 knot, pause. 1 knot, pause. 2 knots. She counted them like her mother's voice was counting with her. A 4, then a longer gap. A 1, 4, 1. Or 41, or a fragment of something longer that the cut had swallowed. She wrote it on the inside of her wrist with the felt pen, above the blue veins, where a sleeve would cover it. Her mother never left a number bare. A number in the seam always came paired with a second, hidden in the direction the last stitch faced, so that a stray count couldn't be read by accident. Kiara turned the hem again, and followed the needle's last angle with her fingertip. It pointed left, toward the corner, toward nothing, because the corner was where the scissors had come. Whatever the pair to the 4-1 was, it had been in the 4 inches of copper that no longer existed. She sat with the arithmetic of that. Someone had not just stopped her mother, someone had known enough to cut the part that finished the message and leave the part that started it, the way you tear a name off a letter and mail the rest. That took a person who understood the thread. That took a person who had watched Gwendolyn work. She pressed the felt pen flat and underlined the 4-1 twice, hard enough to bleed the ink. You're still here. Marcus stood at the end of the row, jacket on, keys in his fist. It's almost 7, Kiara. Finishing, she said. He looked at the sheet on the table, then at her face, and decided not to ask. Marcus had learned, over 3 years, which of her silences had a floor and which didn't. He left. The freight door groaned and settled. She was alone with the machines and the number on her arm. She should have gone home. The eviction notice was folded in her bag. 31 days now. The super's handwriting getting shorter each week. She should have gone home and slept, and been a person with a job in the morning. Instead, she photographed the hem. Then she folded the sheet the way the VIP floor wanted it folded, tight and squared, and she carried it to the service elevator, and she pressed 14. The car climbed slow. Somewhere around 10, the mirrored walls gave her back to herself. The low ponytail, the long side of her bangs, the collar of the tunic damp at the neck. She fixed the collar. Concierge floors noticed collars. The doors opened on a corridor that didn't sound like a hotel. No ice machine, no television bleeding through a door. Carpet so deep her cart would have sunk in it, except she had no cart, only a folded sheet held against her chest like something she was returning. A man sat on a chair at the far end where no chair belonged. Dark suit, hands loose on his knees. He watched her come the length of the hall without pretending to do anything else. "Linens for Kay," she said. She kept her eyes at his tie. "Leave them." His English was clean, careful at the edges. He didn't reach for the sheet. The door to Suite K was open 2 inches, not a guest's carelessness, a guard's habit, a door kept where a man could hear both sides of it. Through the gap, she got the room in strips. A window. A chair turned to the window. A tray untouched, the cloche still on, and a wrist, resting on the arm of the chair, palm up, an IV line taped to the back of the hand. Guests at the St. Vincent did not have IV lines. The sheet, the man said, and now he stood. She held it out. He took it one-handed and set it on a console without looking, and in the second his body turned, she saw past him into the room, all the way to the man in the chair, and the world she'd built in the basement quietly came apart. He wasn't dressed like a guest. A pale patient's robe hung off one shoulder. His head was turned toward the glass, jaw sharp against the gray light, and along the left side of his neck, climbing from under the robe's collar toward his ear, the ink of something dark curled and vanished into his hairline. A tail. A claw. She couldn't see the whole of it, and she didn't need to. She knew that neck. Not the man. She had never met the man. She knew the neck the way you know a face from a photograph you were never meant to keep. Gwendolyn's phone. The picture her mother had shown her once, fast, then locked away. A man at a restaurant table, half-turned, a black shape inked up his throat, and her mother's voice gone flat. This one you never talk about, baby. This one owns the whole thread. Michael Kwan was not Michael Kwan. Is that all? The guard said. It wasn't a question either. That's all. Her voice came out level. She had 18 years of her mother's training in that levelness, and 3 of her own, and she used every year of it to turn around and walk back down the hall at exactly the pace she'd walked up it. Not slower, not faster. A woman who had delivered a sheet. The elevator took her down. She watched the mirrored version of herself and kept her hands from the ring until the doors closed. Then she pressed the ring flat against her chest through the fabric and let herself breathe once, all the way in, all the way out. Her mother's thread was in that man's room. Her mother's number was cut into the hem, and her mother had a photograph of him she'd hidden like it could get someone killed. The basement was dark, except for her terminal. She woke it. She typed Meridian Textile Services into the vendor field and got an address in the garment district and a contract number and nothing else. No phone, no contact, no history before 90 days ago. The vendor had appeared, in the hotel's records, one day before her mother had appeared, in nobody's records, as a woman who'd chosen to walk away. 99 days. She'd crossed off 98 this afternoon. She reached into the locker, took out the felt pen and the calendar of 100 squares, and she did not cross off 99, because it wasn't over yet, and for the first time in months, the not crossing felt like a decision instead of a defeat. She went home. She didn't sleep. She spread the photograph of the hem across the kitchen table, beside the twin ring from the tin, and she stared at the 3 knots until the shapes swam, 4 and 1, 4 and 1, and the super's notice slid off the table onto the floor, and she left it there. The twin ring caught the kitchen light. She picked it up and turned it the way she'd seen the suit want to turn the other one, and there, inside the band, ran the fine engraved line she had looked at 1,000 times and never once read as anything but decoration. Numbers. A sequence, tiny, worn, shallow, by her mother's finger, running the whole inner curve of the gold. She'd always thought it was a jeweler's stamp. She held it under the bulb and read the first digits, and her breath went thin. 4, 1. The knots in the hem weren't a fragment of a message. They were a key to where the rest of it lived, inside the ring. Her mother hadn't been signing a linen. She'd been pointing at it, sewing an arrow that said, "The thing you carry on your chest. Read it, read the thread on the metal, not the cloth." Kiara set the ring down very carefully, the way you set down something that has just changed weight in your hand. She had given the matching one, the one that mattered, the one worn smooth by the same finger, to a man 13 floors up. She'd put the answer directly into the palm of the only person in the world she had reason to fear. And he had closed his hand around it and said, "Live." By the time the sky over Featherbed Lane went from black to the color of old nickel, she had made 2 lists of her own. What she knew, what she didn't. On the first list, her mother had sewn a mark into linens bound for a man in a hospital robe on the 14th floor of the St. Vincent, and someone had stopped her hand mid-stitch. On the second list, longer, everything else. She was on the train before 6, uniform on under her coat, the ring against her chest, the number on her wrist gone faint under the felt, but still there if she pressed. She didn't go to the basement. She went to the 14th floor, and this time the corridor was full. 2 men in dark suits stood outside Suite K. A third, older, in gray with silver at his temples, spoke low into a phone in Korean, and Kiara, who had learned enough of the language from a marriage that didn't last to catch the shape of urgency, heard the words for tonight, and for arrangements, and for a name that wasn't Kwan. A gurney waited against the wall, folded, a blanket squared on top of it. Not a hotel's gurney, a private one, unmarked, the kind that came with men who filled out no forms. They were moving him. A woman in a pale coat stood apart from the suits, a lanyard at her chest, arguing in the flat, exhausted way of someone who has already lost the argument twice. Her badge caught the light, Ortiz, and under it, a hospital's name, and under that, a word Kiara latched onto like a handhold: ethics. He cannot consent to a transfer, the woman was saying. He is sedated. That's not illegal. The family consents. The gray-haired man had lowered the phone. His English was perfect and cold. That is sufficient. Not while I'm signed to this case. Then unsign. That isn't how it works. The doctor didn't raise her voice, but she didn't step back either. A signed reviewer can't be waived off a case by the party requesting the very thing under review. You know that. Your lawyer knows that, which is why you're here at 6 in the morning instead of noon. The gray man's jaw moved once, a small grinding motion, quickly stilled. You are making an enemy for no reason. I'm making a note in a file for every reason. She lifted her lanyard an inch, let it drop. That's the whole job. A younger suit near the gurney shifted his weight, glanced at the gray man, waited for a word that didn't come. Kiara stood at the edge of it, a laundry worker with a folded coat over her arm, invisible the way she was always invisible, and she understood 2 things at once, with the clean speed of panic. They were about to take him somewhere she would never find, and her mother's only thread led straight through him. Once he was gone, so was Gwendolyn. The suits started to move. One bent for the gurney. The gray-haired man stepped back to let them work, and the door to Suite K swung wide, and there he was, upright now in the chair but slack, chin toward his chest, the IV still taped to the back of the upturned hand that hung off the armrest. The dark ink on his neck stood plain in the corridor light. Nobody was looking at his hand. Everyone was looking at the man in gray. Kiara did the arithmetic of the next 4 seconds and decided she would rather be wrong loudly than right too late. She crossed the threshold. She was inside the suite before the nearest suit registered a body that shouldn't move, and she was at the chair before he registered which body, and she took the ring off the chain in one motion. The clasp she'd fixed 100 times gave clean, and she pressed it into the open palm and closed his fingers over it with both of her hands. "You knew my mother," she said, not loud, for him, Gwendolyn. She sewed for you, copper thread. You know the mark. A hand seized her shoulder from behind, hard, and the slack fingers under hers moved. They closed. Not a reflex, a grip, deliberate. The the pad of his thumb finding the ring's small gold band and pressing it into his own palm, like a man testing whether a thing is real. His head came up an inch. The intense dark eyes found her, swam, held, his lips parted. The word came out cracked, barely voiced, in a language that wasn't English, and then in one that was, the same word twice, so quiet only she and the ring between their hands could have heard it. Sarah. A breath. Then, clearer. Live. The hand on her shoulder wrenched her back a full step. The gray-haired man was already turning, already reaching, his cold face cracking into something Kiara had no name for. Recognition, or fear, she couldn't tell, and later she would not be sure there was a difference. But the woman in the pale coat had seen the fingers move too. He responded. Ortiz was across the room, between Kiara and the suits, her voice suddenly loud and certain. All the exhaustion burned off it. He responded to stimulus and speech. That is a change in status. I am not clearing a transfer on a patient whose status just changed. She had her phone up, thumb moving. I'm putting a hold on it. Right now, in writing. You have no authority here, the gray man said. I have exactly the authority that keeps you from being asked, later, why you moved a responsive patient against a standing ethics review. She didn't blink. Move him tonight, and that question gets asked. I promise you that. For a moment, the corridor held its breath. The suits half-crouched at the gurney, the gray man rigid, the doctor's thumb hovering over send, and in the chair, a man with a dead woman's ring closed in his fist, watching Kiara over all their heads with the first fully open eyes anyone in that room had seen in days. The gray man looked at his own hands. Then he said something short in Korean to the nearest suit, and the man let go of Kiara's shoulder, and the gurney did not come into the room. Get her out, the gray man said, in English, for her. They got her out. 2 hands, the corridor, the elevator, the whole descent, a suit riding down with her the whole way, and saying nothing, and letting her off in the lobby like a piece of returned property. In the car, the suit had watched her in the mirrored panel, the same way the man in the chair had watched her, except this one was measuring. He asked one question halfway down, in English carefully stripped of any accent that might place him. Where did you get that ring? Not a threat. Worse, a man logging an answer he would carry back up. It was my mother's, Kiara said, to the doors. Your mother, he said it, the way a man repeats a word he intends to check. The floors counted down. He didn't ask anything else, and that silence told her the name. Gwendolyn had already meant something in that suite, before she'd ever spoken it. She kept her hands folded and her face empty, and let him log whatever he was logging. She stood on the marble under the chandeliers she'd never once stood beneath in daylight, in her laundry uniform, empty-handed. The ring was gone. She'd given it away with her own hands. But he had said live, and he had said a name that wasn't hers, and the transfer that would have erased her mother's last thread had been stopped by a stranger with a lanyard because a sedated man's fingers had closed. Kiara pressed her palm flat to her sternum. The chain was still there. The pendant it had carried was not. She felt the absence like a coin-sized cold spot over her heart, and understood, standing in that gold-lit lobby, that she had just traded the last thing her mother had physically pressed into her hand for a single word from a man the whole world called Snow Wolf. Upstairs, 13 floors up, that man was turning the ring over in his fingers, reading the sequence engraved inside the band. The same sequence, though Kiara didn't know it yet, that his own hands had once helped hide, and the story she thought she was in, the story of a daughter looking for a lost mother, was quietly becoming a different story entirely. She didn't cross off 99 that night, or the 100 that came after it. The wall of 100 squares had stopped being a countdown, It had become a receipt she intended to collect. The security man in the elevator had said her mother's name like a door closing, and by the time Kiara reached the lobby, the corridor above her had already emptied. She did not go home. She stood by the revolving door and waited, because the man on the 14th floor had closed his hand around her ring, and a hand that closes does not open by itself. They came for her before noon. Not the gray-haired one. A younger man, black coat, a thin scar cutting his right eyebrow, moving through the lobby the way water finds the lowest floor. He stopped 2 steps from her and held out a keycard between 2 fingers. "He wants to talk," Park Ji-ho said. "Who does?" "You know who." Kiara looked at the card, not his face. "The last time I went up there, 3 of you tried to carry a sedated man out a service door." That was his brother's plan. A pause. "This is his." She took the card. The ride up was silent. Ji-ho watched the floor numbers instead of her, and the muscle along his jaw moved once, like a man rehearsing something he had decided not to say. When the doors opened on 14, the corridor had changed. No makas, no cluster of suits, 1 guard at Suite K, and he stepped aside without being told. Kang Min-jae was sitting up. The IV line was gone from his hand. The pale patient's robe was still there, but he had pulled it closed and belted it, and he sat forward on the edge of the chair, the way a man sits when he intends to stand soon. The ring rested on his open palm. He had not put it away. He had held it the whole night, the way she had held the calendar. "Close the door," he said. His voice was low, roughened at the edges from the sedation, and the English came slow but clean. Ji-ho pulled it shut and stayed inside it. Min-jae turned the ring so the inside of the band caught the light. "You know what's written here. I know it starts 4-1. It doesn't start 4-1. He looked up. "That's where your mother stopped teaching you. 4-1 is the second pair. The first pair is why you never found the beginning of her message on the sheet." He set the ring on the small table between them, band up, and slid it toward her with 1 finger. "Read it. All of it. Out loud." Kiara did not touch it yet. "Why would I read you your own code?" "Because it isn't mine." He held her eyes. "It's hers. She built it. I only carried it out the building the night she couldn't." The night she couldn't. Kiara heard the sentence and heard the shape of the thing under it. The cut copper thread, the 4 missing inches, the half message left in a hem. She picked up the ring. The engraving ran the full inside of the band, tiny, pressed by a hand that inspected fabric for a living and knew how to make a mark survive 1,000 washes. She read the numbers in pairs, slow, and Min-jae's lips moved with her, and at the 7th pair his shoulders dropped a fraction, the way a man breathes when a lock he has been listening to finally gives. "Stop," he said. "That's enough. That's the whole key." "Key to what?" He reached to the side of the chair and lifted a flat tablet from where it had been wedged against the cushion. His thumb moved. He turned the screen toward her. 6 columns, each one a list of names, dates, ports of entry, and against most of the lines, a gap, a blank where a name should be, a date with no place attached to it, a route that started somewhere and ended in white space. 6 manifests, Min-jae said. 6 shipments my family moved through the garment district over 18 months. People, my love, not fabric. The endearment came out of him without weight, a habit of a man used to charming, and it landed wrong in the room, and he seemed to know it, and did not use it again. Your mother inspected linens for the clinics we shipped them through. She found what was writing under the linens. She started writing it down, the only way no one would think to read. Copper thread. In the hems of the sheets she flagged. 1 knot, 1 number, 6 sheets, 6 partial manifests. But the numbers only line up if you have the key that tells you where each list starts and how far it runs. He nodded at the ring in her hand. That? She kept the key on her own body, on the band she wore every day. She made a second one for you and never told you what it was. Kiara's thumb closed over the engraving. So the lists open with this. They complete with it. Watch. He typed the pairs. He did not need to read them off her hand. He had heard her say them, and he entered them from memory, and that told her something too, that this man forgot nothing he was given. The screen redrew. The blanks in the first column began to fill, a name against a route against a port against a date. Not all of them. The column closed at 9 lines and went white again. Incomplete, she said. All 6 are incomplete. He set the tablet flat. Kiara stared at the 9 filled lines, each one a name she did not know, a woman's name in 3 of them, a date, a port, and then the route running to a clinic she could almost place. A linen contract the St. Vincent sub-solo had handled 2 years back, before the VIP floor went to an outside vendor. She had folded sheets that came from that address. She had pressed her mother's kind of hem into her hands 100 times without knowing what any of them had once wrapped. These clinics, she said, they're real. They were real. They took the linen contracts and asked no questions about what shared the truck. He watched her follow the lines with her eyes. Your mother asked the question. That was the whole crime. A woman who inspected fabric for 11 years noticed the fabric was covering something that breathed. And you moved it out the door. I moved a lot of things out of doors. He did not soften it. I told myself linen. Then one shipment, I opened the wrong crate, and I stopped telling myself linen, and I started counting the days until I could put it in front of the family and burn it down. He tapped the edge of the tablet. 90-some days ago, I made the mistake of saying so out loud. 2 weeks later, I was a patient named Michael Kwan. She flagged 6 sheets before someone noticed the pattern. She was working on the 7th when the copper thread got cut. 4 inches, mid-stitch. You saw it. I saw it. That was the night she stopped writing. He said it plainly. No drama. And the plainness was worse. And that was the night I was told she'd been paid off and sent home. I believed it. For a while, I believed it. The room held still. Ji-ho, by the door, had not moved through any of it. Kiara looked at the 6 columns, at the white gaps standing in them like missing teeth. Her mother had built a machine out of thread and had hidden half the instructions inside a ring she pressed into her daughter's palm the morning she disappeared. Read the thread, not the noise, the thread. Where is she? Kiara said. I don't know. You closed your hand on this ring and said live. Her voice did not rise. It went flatter, which, in her, was worse than rising. You knew her name before I said it. You know what she found. You know who cut the thread, and you're telling me you don't know where she is. I know she was alive 98 days ago. He held her eyes through it. I know the people who moved her are the same people who put me in this chair with a needle in my arm and a false name on the door. Michael Kwan. I didn't choose that name. My brother chose it, to keep me somewhere quiet while a vote happens. What vote? For the first time, he looked away from her, toward the window, and when he looked back, the charm was gone from his face entirely, and what was left was harder and more useful. My father is old, Min-jae said. In 12 days, the family decides who holds the roots after him. My brother, Dae-sung, the gray one you met, or me. Dae-sung profits from those 6 shipments. I was going to end them, so I became a patient. A sedated man can't stand in front of a room and say stop. He tapped the tablet. Your mother's 6 lists are the only proof that the shipments carried people, not linen. Whoever holds those lists holds the vote. Dae-sung has spent 98 days making sure no one can complete them. He cut the thread. He hid the woman who sewed it. He didn't hide the ring. No. Something moved at the corner of Min-jae's mouth that was not a smile. You walked it back into the building yourself. Kiara sat down across from him because her legs told her to, not because she chose it. The calendar in her head turned over. 98 days behind her, 12 days in front of him, and her mother, somewhere in the white space between the lines of 6 broken lists. You need me, she said slowly. You need the key, and the key is on my finger, and I'm the only one who can testify where the sheets came from. Yes, and I need you, because you have the 6 lists and the room they get read in. She turned the ring once, watching him. That's not trust. That's arithmetic. Arithmetic keeps people alive longer than trust does. He leaned back, and the robe pulled at his shoulder, and the black ink at the side of his neck showed above the collar for a second before he settled. I'm not going to tell you I'm a good man, Miss Weller. I'm going to tell you our numbers match. For 12 days, that's enough. Kiara let the silence run until it was hers and not his. 3 things, she said. Min-jae waited. 1. My mother is found before your vote, not after. I don't hand you a finished list and then hear you'll look into it. She lifted a finger off the ring. 2. Nobody moves you out of this hospital until it's done. You stay responsive. You stay on the ethics review. You stay where I can reach you. The moment you disappear, the ring disappears, and your brother inherits 6 blank pages. A second finger. 3. Whatever's in those lists, the names, the people who rode under the linen, they don't vanish into your family the way she did. When it's over, someone outside your walls sees them. That's not negotiable. She let the 3 conditions sit in the room. Min-jae did not answer fast, and the not answering told her he was taking them as real terms and not the demands of a woman who folded sheets. He looked at the first finger she had lifted, then the second, then the third, as if reading a hymn for the count of its knots. The first is the hard one, he said at last. Found before, not after. If I put your mother's face in front of the wrong person to find her fast, they'll make sure she can't be found at all. Then, use the right person. There's one man who knew where she was moved, his jaw set. He works for my brother. He owes me from before. That's a coin I can spend exactly once. Then, spend it on her. Ji-ho spoke for the first time since the door. 2 words in Korean, fast, aimed at Min-jae, and Kiara caught the shape of a warning in it, even without the meaning. Min-jae answered him without looking away from her. 1 word. Then, in English, to her, he thinks the 3rd condition can get people killed. Then, find her fast, Kiara said, so it doesn't have to wait until after. He studied her for a long moment. She had seen men in the laundry weigh a stained sheet the same way, deciding whether it could be saved or had to be written off. She let him weigh her. She had already decided she could not be written off. Agreed, Min-jae said. All 3. Say the second one back to me. The corner of his mouth moved again. I don't leave this floor until your mother is found. If I vanish, so does the ring. He inclined his head, a small formal thing, older than the robe he was wearing. You learn fast, for a woman who folds sheets. I learned it folding sheets. He reached for the tablet and turned it fully toward her, and for the first time, he did not hold it back an inch, did not keep the angle to himself. On the screen, the 6 columns, 9 lines filled in the first, white in the rest. Then start reading, he said. There's a name your mother left half written in the 4th list. A place, not a person. She got 2 syllables of it into the thread before it was cut. He scrolled, and stopped, and pointed. Willow. Kiara looked at the 4 letters standing alone at the end of a broken line. No root attached, no date, the copper knot that would have finished the word pulled out 4 inches deep. Willow what? She said. That's what you're going to tell me. He set the ring back on the table, band up between them, and did not close his hand over it this time. He left it there, in the open, hers to take. She started the word. You have the key. Finish it. Kiara picked up the ring and put the chain over her head and let it fall cold against her chest where it belonged. The weight of it settling was the first thing in 98 days that felt like a step and not a wall. She stood. Jiho moved to open the door, and this time he did it before she reached it, and that was its own kind of information. 12 days, she said from the threshold. 11, by tonight, Min-jae answered. He was looking at the window again, at the gray city that had swallowed her mother and left one copper thread hanging. Miss Weller, the word she was writing. When you find the rest of it, don't go there alone. I fold sheets, Kiara said. Nobody watches where I go. She did not tell him that the second thing she was going to do, before she chased the word willow into whatever it opened, was go home, take the calendar off the inside of her locker door, and stop counting to 100. The countdown was finished. She had 11 days now, and a name half sewn into a dead root, and a man in a robe with her mother's key in his lap who needed her exactly as much as she needed him. The elevator doors closed on the 14th floor. She rode down alone, the ring warm now against her skin, 4 letters turning in her head, Willow, and under the 4 letters, the thing Min-jae had said so plainly it had cut deeper than any shout. She was alive 98 days ago, sitting in her chest like a knot she would spend the next 11 days trying to read the rest of. In the lobby, she pulled her phone out and typed the 4 letters into the search bar, and then stopped, thumb over the screen, because a word with no ending returns 1,000 answers, and none of them true. Her mother had not taught her to chase 1,000 answers. She had taught her to read one thread to its end. Kiara put the phone away. She went down to the sub-solo, past the sorting bay, where Marcus lifted his head and started to ask if she was okay, and got no answer, to the terminal, where the lot records lived. If the 4th manifest ran through the garment district, and the 4th manifest carried the half-word willow, then somewhere in the delivery logs there was a laundry that fed those linens, a real address, a loading dock, a name that finished the word. She typed the batch parent from the 4th column into the field and pressed enter, and the screen thought about it and began, slowly, to fill. The screen filled, and it was wrong before Kiara understood why. The 4th column's batch parent didn't route to Meridian. It routed to a second vendor she had never seen, Laurel Linen Co-op, an address in the far edge of the garment district, past the blocks where the freight elevators still ran. The linens for the 4th list had come clean into the St. Vincent through Laurel, and Laurel had received them, 3 years running, from a single pickup point. 1 dock, 1 recurring slot every Tuesday before dawn. She copied the address onto the inside of her wrist, under the 4-1 from 2 nights ago that hadn't washed off. Then she pulled the pickup manifests, 1 Tuesday at a time, and watched the same 4 words repeat down the receiving line where a facility name should go. Willow Crest Care. Not Willow, Willow Crest. Her mother had gotten 2 syllables into the thread before the copper was cut, and here were the rest, sitting in a delivery log any night shift clerk could have read for 3 years and never once thought to read. Kiara sat very still. The caldera shuddered somewhere behind the wall, the way it did, and she barely heard it. Willow Crest Care ran linens through Laurel, and Laurel fed the 4th floor, and her mother had inspected those exact linens and sewn a half-word into a hem before something took the needle out of her hand. A care facility, the kind of place that took people in and gave them a bed and a chart and a name on a wristband. The kind of place a woman could be moved into and go quiet in and never be reported missing, because she wasn't missing. She was a resident. She printed nothing. She wrote the name on her wrist beside the address and pulled her sleeve down over both. Marcus was watching her from the sorting bay, a folded stack forgotten against his chest. "Kiara, you've been down here since your shift ended. That was 4 hours ago." "I know." "You gonna tell me what's going on with you?" "No." She stood, and something in how she said it made him step back, not hurt, just clear that the door was closed. "Marcus, if anybody asks where I went, anybody in a suit, anybody at all, you didn't see me leave." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned back to his stack, and she loved him a little for asking nothing else. She rode the freight elevator up and out through the loading dock so she wouldn't cross the lobby, and the cold hit her at the top of the ramp like a hand. 11 degrees, maybe less. She'd left her coat in the locker beside a calendar she was done counting. She didn't go back for it. The garment district at that hour was shuttered gates and one lit diner, and steam coming up through the grates like the street was breathing. Laurel Linen Co-op was a roll-down door with a buzzer that didn't work and a smaller side door that did. Kiara stood across the street in a doorway that smelled of old cardboard and watched it for 20 minutes, the way her mother would have watched it, not the door, the pattern, who came, who went, what time. At 5:15, a van pulled to the dock. White, unmarked, the way the private gurney upstairs had been unmarked, and she was learning to read the absence of a name as a name in itself. 2 men unloaded canvas carts. She watched the carts, not the men. The linens going in were dirty. The linens coming out, 20 minutes later, loaded into a second van, were clean and pressed and stacked in the pattern she folded 100 times a shift. The second van had a magnet sign on the door, the cheap kind, slightly crooked. Willow Crest Care, a sunrise logo, a phone number. Kiara memorized the plate and let the van pull away and did not follow it on foot, because you cannot follow a van on foot, and because Minjae's voice was in her ear from the threshold of the suite. Don't go there alone. She had told him nobody watched where she went. That had been true when she folded sheets. It was becoming less true by the hour. She went home instead, not to sleep, to read. Willow Crest Care had a website, the kind a place like that keeps, because a licensing board requires it. 3 stock photos of a garden, a mission statement about dignity, a list of services. Skilled nursing, memory care, long-term residential for adults whose families require discretion. The last line was set in the same neutral font as the rest, and it was the only true sentence on the page. She found the state facility registry next and searched the license number. Willow Crest Care, LLC, sole member, a holding company. The holding company's registered agent was a law office. She stopped there because a name behind a name behind a name was how these people built a wall, and she was not going to climb it tonight with a phone in a cold kitchen. She looked instead at the resident directory the state required them to keep semi-public. First initial, last name, admission month, nothing more. She scrolled the admissions from 3 months back, the month her mother went quiet. There was no Weller. She scrolled again, slower, and this time she wasn't reading for her mother's name. She was reading for a lie shaped like her mother, something close, something a person could answer to without flinching, if they moved you and sedated and told you softly, every morning, that this was who you were now. G. Wells, admitted the same week, memory care wing. Gloria Wells. Kiara set the phone face down on the counter and put both hands flat on the cold laminate and breathed. Her mother's name was Gwendolyn Weller. Somebody had kept the G. Somebody had kept the first sound of the last name and filed off the rest, the way the copper thread had been kept at the start and cut at the finish. The same hand, the same method. Keep the beginning so it reads as real. Remove the end so it can never be traced to a hole. You read the thread, her mother had said. Kiara was reading it. It ran from a hem in the subsolo, to a code inside a ring, to a half-word on a broken line, to a name that was 3/4 of her mother, sitting in a memory care wing, under a Sunrise logo, admitted the same week the police wrote voluntary in a box, and closed the file. She did not cry. She had done that in the first month, and it had not brought anyone back. She turned the phone over and wrote down the wing, and the visiting hours, and the one detail the website offered without meaning to, that memory care visitors were logged, photographed, and required to be on an approved list. You did not walk into Gloria Wells's room. You were let in, or you were turned away at a desk by someone trained to be sorry, which meant she could not simply go and take her mother out. Not tonight, not with a plastic badge that said laundry and a last name that would light up the wrong way the instant a clerk typed it. Her mother was 10 miles away in a bed with a false name, and the distance between them was not miles. It was a list Kiara wasn't on, held by people who had put her mother there precisely so that no daughter could walk up and ask. She sat with that until the window went from black to gray. Then she did the arithmetic, the way he'd taught her to, the cold way, the way that had nothing to do with what she felt. She had a name now, Gloria Wells, and a place, Willow Crest, and a false admission that a lawyer could break if a lawyer could be made to care. She had a man on the 14th floor who had a family of lawyers and a favor owed to him by someone who worked for the brother, a coin he could spend once. The first condition she had set was the hardest, and it was the only one that mattered this morning. Her mother found before the vote. She had found her. Finding her wasn't the same as reaching her. She needed the coin spent, and only Min Jae could spend it. Kiara went in before 6, badge on, sleeves down over the 2 names on her wrist. She did not stop at the sub-solo. She took the guest elevator to 14 with the confidence of a woman delivering linens, and the guard outside Suite K, a new one, younger, looked at the badge and not the face and let her pass. And she understood in that moment exactly how her mother had walked into a dozen clinics for 11 years. Nobody stops the woman with the folded sheets. The uniform is the key that opens every door that matters, and none of the doors that hurt you. Min Jae was awake. He was always awake. She was learning. The robe was belted, the tablet dark on the tray beside him. The ring. No, the ring was on her chest. She had it. He had the copy of nothing. He had his own hands, empty, folded, and the stillness of a man who had trained himself out of every tell and kept exactly one, which was that when she came through the door his eyes went first to her wrist, where he had watched her write a code 2 nights ago. "You found the word," he said, not a question. Willow Crest Care. She stayed by the door. Memory care facility. My mother's been there since the week she disappeared. She let it land. Admitted as Gloria Wells. Something moved across his face and was gone. Wells. They kept the G. They kept the first sound. Cut the rest. She watched him, same as the thread, same as whoever cut the thread. "You told me your brother did that." "I told you my brother hid the woman who sewed." He said it carefully, and she heard the care, and the care told her something. "I did not tell you he chose the name." "Then who chose the name?" He looked at her, and for the length of a breath she thought he would answer, and then his eyes went past her to the tablet on the tray, and he reached for it, and she watched him decide to show her something instead of saying it, which was his way, always the object and never the sentence. "Before I give you the lawyer who breaks that admission," he said, "before I spend the coin, you should see who you're walking toward. Willow Crest isn't the brother's. He profits. He didn't build it. He turned the screen on. I've had eyes on the 4th route since before you found the hem. I keep a record." He turned the tablet toward her, and it was the same gesture as 2 nights ago, the one that had felt like trust. The screen offered fully, no angle held back. Except this time Kiara was closer, and this time she was reading fast the way fear makes you read, and what filled the screen was not a manifest. It was a photograph, grainy, time-stamped, shot from across a street through a long lens. Laurel Linen Co-op at 5:15 that morning. The dock, the white van, and in the doorway across from it, in a coat she wasn't wearing because she'd left it in her locker, was a woman in a green laundry tunic, standing very still, watching the carts. Her. The timestamp was 2 hours old. The angle was from the diner side of the street, from a window she had walked past without a glance. Somebody had been in that diner. Somebody had photographed her watching the van, and the photograph was already here, on a tablet in a hospital suite, in a folder that Min-jae kept, and Min-jae opened, and Min-jae had just turned toward her, as casually as a man showing a map. Kiara did not move. The room did the thing rooms do when the floor tilts and stays level. She made herself read the rest of the screen. Above the photograph, a folder title in Korean she couldn't read, and a string of dates she could. The dates ran back 3 months. The dates ran back to the week her mother went quiet. There were more thumbnails below the top image, a row of them. She didn't need to open them to know. A woman on a subway platform. A woman crossing 3 blocks in a coffee-stained tunic. A woman at a kitchen window at 4 in the morning, shot from a building across the courtyard, the phone glowing in her hand. Her. All of them her. For weeks. From before the hem, from before she'd found a single thread, from before she was anything to him but the daughter of the woman who sewed. "You watched me," she said. Her voice came out level, and the levelness cost her everything. "Before I came to you, before the ring, you were already watching me." Finjay's hand didn't leave the tablet. "Yes. How long?" "Since your mother stopped sewing." He met her eyes and did not soften it, and later she would understand that not softening it was the only honest thing he had left to give her, and hate him for it anyway. I needed to know if she'd told anyone. If the thread went further than the hems, you were the place it would have gone. A pause, one beat, the smooth pause of a man choosing the weight of a word. You were a loose end I hadn't decided about yet. The chain was cold against her chest. The ring hung there, her mother's ring, the key she had carried up to him with her own hands, and pressed into his open palm, and closed his fingers over, believing, she made herself say the word inside her own head, believing that she was the one who had found him. She had not found him. He had let her arrive. He had known her face for 3 months. He had known her name before she said it in that room, had known Gwendolyn was her mother before she ever whispered copper thread, had sat in a patient's robe and said Sarah and Liv to a stranger who was not a stranger at all, who was a photograph in a folder he opened whenever he wanted to. Every condition she had set as an equal. She had stood in this room and said the words are not negotiable, and believed she had leverage. She'd had a face in his surveillance folder. That was all she had ever had. "The favor you owe," she said slowly, "the coin you can spend once." To find where my mother was moved. Her mouth was dry. "You already knew where she was. You knew this morning. You knew before I walked in and told you Willowcrest like I was bringing you something." He was quiet. "You let me find her." The pieces were turning now, cold, fast, the arithmetic running itself. "You let me do all of it, the hem, the code, the word. You knew the name Gloria Wells before I did. You've had eyes on that facility for months." She took one step back toward the door. "The coin isn't for finding her. There's nothing to find. You've known where she was the whole time." Kiara. It was the first time he had used her first name. And it stopped her, and then it did the opposite of what he meant, because a man who had studied you for 3 months would know exactly when to use your name for the first time, and the knowing was the whole horror of it. Don't. She got the door open behind her without looking, her hand finding the handle the way her mother's hand had found a seal, buying one more second of not knowing, and getting it, and hating it. Don't say my name like you just learned it. I need you to hear the rest before you need. She almost laughed, and it came out wrong, and she swallowed it. You've been telling me this was arithmetic. You and me, even, a trade. My key for your room. It was never even. You had my face in a folder before I had your name in my mouth. The chain burned cold. I brought you the ring. I closed your hand around it. I did that. You did. He said it low, and for once there was something underneath the smooth of it. Something she refused to look at, because looking at it would cost her the anger, and the anger was the only thing holding her upright. And I let you, because I needed the key to come to me clean, from her blood, so no one could say I took it. Everything I have told you is true. The lists are true. The vote is true. Your mother is alive and she is at Willowcrest, and I can get her out. He leaned forward an inch, the most she had ever seen him move. I lied about one thing. When I found her weeks ago. I did not tell you, because if you knew I could reach her, you would have stopped trading with me the moment she was safe. And I still need the woman who folds sheets. I need her testimony in that room in 11 days more than I have ever needed anything. There it was. The truth so plain it cut deeper than any shout, the way it always did with him. He hadn't kept her mother from her by accident. He'd kept the reaching of her as a card, because a daughter with her mother back had no reason left to walk into a family vote and burn it down. You held her, Kiara said. You knew she was alive, and where, and you sat on it, and you let me count days on a calendar and leave my coat in a locker and stand in the cold outside a laundry, so I'd stay useful. Yes, the single word, no adjective. He'd taught her that too, without meaning to, that the cruelest things fit in the smallest words. She stood in the open door with the corridor at her back, and her mother's ring on her chest, and 11 days on a clock she no longer controlled, and she understood that she had walked up 13 floors and made 3 conditions, and thought herself a partner, and she had been, the whole time, a loose end he hadn't decided about, and then decided to use. Kiara, don't go there alone. His voice followed her into the hall, the same warning as 2 nights ago, and it meant something different now, and both meanings were true. The people who named her Gloria Wells will know the second you walk in. You are not on the list. You will not get her out with a badge and a last name. If you go without me, you lose her, and you lose the room, and the 6 lists die with the vote. A breath. I am still the arithmetic. I am just no longer the man you thought was doing it with you. She did not answer him. She let the door swing shut on the sunrise gray window, and the tablet full of her own face, and the man who had known her longer than she had known any of it. In the elevator, she did not press the lobby button right away. She stood with her back to the doors, and pulled her sleeve up, and looked at the 2 things written on her wrist in felt tip that wouldn't wash off, the address of a laundry, and the name Willowcrest Care, and beside them, faded now, the 4-1 she'd copied from a hem in a sub-solo 4 nights and a whole life ago. Her mother was 10 miles away under 3/4 of her own name. The man who could reach her had been holding her like a coin, and the only door into that memory care wing was a list Kiara wasn't on, guarded by the same people who had cut the thread and kept the beginning and filed off the end. She pressed the button. The car began to drop. She wasn't on the list, but she had spent 3 years learning the one thing these people never counted on, the thing her mother had built an entire secret language out of. Nobody stops the woman with the folded sheets. Willowcrest ran its linens through Laurel, and Laurel had a slot every Tuesday before dawn. The doors opened on the lobby, and Kiara walked out into it, with her sleeve pulled down and her mother's ring cold against her heart, and a plan forming that did not need Kang Min-jae's lawyer, or Kang Min-jae's coin, or Kang Min-jae at all. A plan that needed only a green tunic, a canvas cart, and the fact that she folded better than anyone alive. Tuesday was 3 days away. The green tunic came out of a supply closet on the 3rd floor, 2 sizes too big, still creased from the plastic. Kiara took it because the collar had no name sewn in. She left her own tunic in the locker beside the coat and the wall of 100 squares she was no longer counting, and she walked out of the St. Vincent through the loading dock the way she had walked out 3 nights running, and she gave herself the 3 days it took Tuesday to come. She spent them learning the Laurel's clock. Not the front of it, the seam of it. The white van rolled to the co-op dock at 5:15 every morning, dirty linens in, and the second van, the one with the crooked magnet, rolled out at 6 with the clean load bound for the pickup that fed Willowcrest. Kiara stood in the diner doorway across the street and drank coffee she did not taste, and watched the men who loaded it. 2 of them. Neither ever looked at the carts. They looked at their phones, and they looked at the time, and they pushed what the cart handed them. That was the whole of it. A cart with folded linen at the top and a woman behind it in the right green did not exist to men whose job was to move it fast and go home. Her mother had walked into 11 years of clinics on exactly that arithmetic. Monday night, she did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table under the eviction notice, and she took the twin ring out of the tin, and she read the 7 pairs off the inside of the band until she could say them backward. Then she put that ring back in the tin, in the flour canister, behind the flour, and she wore the other one, her mother's, on the chain under the borrowed tunic. 1 ring where a search would find it, 1 where it wouldn't. She had learned that trick from a woman who hid whole manifests inside a hem. Tuesday came the color of dishwater. She was at the Laurel dock at 4:40, before the first van, in a doorway 2 down from her usual, and she watched the dirty load go in, and she waited for the 20 minutes of nothing that came after, when the 2 loaders went inside for the clean run, and the dock stood open and unwatched. 20 minutes. She had timed it 3 mornings. She used 4 of them. The clean carts sat in a row inside the roll door, tagged and stacked, and the 3rd from the end wore the crooked magnet's route slip clipped to its rail. A delivery manifest, a stop list, and at the bottom of the list, in the plain type of a thing nobody was hiding anymore because nobody thought a laundry cart could read, Willowcrest Care, SVC entrance, rear. Kiara lifted the top 3 linen bundles, set them on the floor, climbed nothing and hid nothing. She simply took the cart's handle, tipped the folded stack forward to hide the empty well beneath, and pushed it to the mouth of the second van, as if she had done it 1,000 mornings. When the loader came back with his phone in his hand, he found a cart already at the ramp and a laundry woman standing patient beside it, and he grunted a thing that wasn't quite a word, and he loaded it, and he loaded her, because she stepped up into the van behind it and pulled the door, and he did not care. The van smelled of bleach and cold metal. She rode it in the dark on an overturned crate, one hand on her mother's ring through the cloth, and she counted the turns the way she counted sheets. Left, left, the long straight that had to be the parkway. She did not look out. A face in a service van window was a face someone remembered. She let herself think, in the dark, only about the next 20 feet. Not the desk with the camera, not the keypad, not the part she had no answer for, which was the part where a woman who had been folded into a building came back out of it. She had built a plan that got her in. She had told herself the rest would show her its own seam once she was standing in it. Her mother used to work that way. You don't inspect the whole warehouse from the door. You pick up 1 sheet. You find 1 thread. The next thing tells you where the next thread is. The crate rocked under her on a pothole. She steadied the folded stack with her free hand so it would not spill and give the well beneath it away, and she thought about how many mornings her mother had ridden vans exactly like this one, into places exactly like the one ahead, and how she had never once said a word about being afraid, because being afraid was a thing you did after, in your own kitchen, with the door locked. Not on the crate. On the crate you counted turns. The brakes came on soft, the engine cut, a handbrake ratcheted, voices outside, close. Willow Crest received its linens at a rear dock behind a hedge-trimmed square, and the man who signed for them wore scrubs and a lanyard, and did not sign for the woman who came off the van pushing the cart. He held a door. That was his whole crime. He held a door for green cloth and a full cart, and he went back to his clipboard, and Kiara Weller pushed her mother's linens into the building that had swallowed her mother. Inside was carpet the color of oatmeal, and a smell under the lavender that she knew from every clinic she had ever cleaned for. The smell of people kept still. A sign at the corridor split. Long-term care, one arrow. Memory care, secure, the other, and under it a keypad and a door with a small wire glass window. She did not go at the keypad. She went at the cart. Memory care took fresh linen the same as any floor, and a secure door opened for the staff who carried it, and Kiara stood at the wire glass with her full cart and waited, folding a towel she did not need to fold, until an aide came out with an armful of stripped bedding and held the door with her hip because her hands were full. Linens, Kiara said, the first word she had spoken since the diner, and the aide said, back hall, and did not look at her face, and the door was open, and she was through. The back hall had rooms with names in slide frames beside each door, handwriting on cardstock, so they could change them when the beds changed. She pushed the cart slow, and she read them the way she'd read the resident directory at 4 a.m, not for her mother's name, because her mother's name had been cut down to a lie, but for the shape of the lie. M. Torres, D. Okafor, a door with no name at all. And then, past the day room where a television talked to nobody, a slide frame in the same clerk's hand as all the rest, G. Wells. Kiara set the cart against the wall so it would look like it belonged there, and she took a folded blanket off the top so her hands would look like they had a reason, and she went in. The room was small and warm and beige, and it had a window with a screen and a chair by the bed and a woman in the chair. 52 years old. Short natural curls gone grayer at the front than 100 days should have made them. The rectangular glasses were gone. Nobody had thought to keep the glasses, and without them, her mother's face looked unfinished, softer and older at once, turned to the window at nothing. She wore a cardigan that wasn't hers. Institutional lavender, a shade off from the polo she used to wear, close enough that Kiara understood somebody had chosen it on purpose, dressing the lie in the dead woman's favorite color. Kiara stood in the doorway and could not move. She had run 3 days of clock and 1 cold van ride, and a keypad she'd beaten with a laundry cart, and every hour of it she had held in her head a version of this room where the woman in it stood up. In the version that kept her walking, her mother turned and knew her, and crossed the floor, and it was done. She had let herself want that one. She saw now, in the beige and the warm and the wrong cardigan, how much she had wanted it, and how thin it had been. "Mama," Kiara said. Gwendolyn turned from the window. Her eyes moved over the green tunic first, the way they had moved over cloth for 11 years, checking the seam, checking the badge, and then they came up to the face above the collar, and they stopped. For 1 second, there was nothing in them. 1 second where the door of the whole world hung on a hinge, and Kiara stood in it, holding a blanket she did not need, and her mother looked at her like a stranger in a uniform. Then something behind the eyes came loose. "You're not supposed to chase the noise," Gwendolyn said. Slow. The words coming up from somewhere they'd been kept under. I told you, you read the thread." Kiara's knees went. She got herself to the chair's arm and down onto it, and she took her mother's hand in both of hers, and the hand was cool, and the nails were cut wrong, cut by someone who didn't know her, and the wedding band was gone from the finger. They had taken the ring with the sequins in it. Of course they had. They took everything that could be read. I read it, Kiara said. Mama, I read all of it. I found the copper. I found the hem. She wanted to pour 100 days onto the beige floor at once, and let her mother pick through it the way she picked through cloth. The restricted lots, the neck in a doorway, the 7 pairs off the inside of a ring, the 6 lists that filled 9 lines and went white. Carrying it alone had bent her more than she'd let herself feel, but her mother's face was working slow, a thing swimming up from underwater, and she made herself go quiet and let it surface. Her mother's fingers moved in hers, searching, the old inspecting motion, feeling for a seam that wasn't there. They give me a pill in the morning, Gwendolyn said, and the day goes soft. I keep count in the mornings before the pill. I got up to a number. I lost the number. Her mouth worked. How many days, baby? Kiara opened her mouth to say 100, and she could not make it 100. The word was too big to fit through her throat. A while, she said. A long while. It's over now. I'm getting you out. And even as she said it, she was already seeing the door with the keypad, the aide's hip, the lanyard, the man who signed. She had gotten a cart in. A cart was not a woman on her feet in the world. There was no van going out that she could hide a person inside of, no route slip that read 1 passenger, and the front of this place had a desk and a sign-in sheet and a camera aimed at everyone who left through it, and her mother could not walk a hedge and climb a crate. Her mother lost the number. She had come all this way on the arithmetic of nobody stopping the woman with the folded linens, and the arithmetic ran one direction only, in. The thing she had not let herself do on the crate, she did now, sitting on the arm of a stranger's chair holding her mother's cut nails. She did the math out to the end. A cart went out empty or went out full of stripped bedding, and it went out the rear on a route slip that named a co-op, not a name. Her mother on her feet in the corridor was a resident leaving a secure floor, and a resident leaving a secure floor tripped a log and a badge and a face at the front desk who knew every name on the wing, including the one that wasn't real. She could get a sheet out of Willow Crest. She could not get a person out of it. Not today, not on a laundry woman's arithmetic. The plan that had carried her the whole way had carried her exactly as far as this chair, and no further, and she had known that, somewhere under the wanting, for 3 days, and pushed the knowing down, and come anyway. Because coming was still a thing she could do, because the woman who cut her mother's thread had counted on her doing nothing. You got thin, Gwendolyn said suddenly, her hand turning Kiara's wrist over, reading the felt pen marks smudged there, an address, 2 words, an old 4-1. Her thumb passed over them the way it passed over a seam. You've been carrying the whole bolt. Her eyes came up. By yourself. Gwendolyn saw it happen on her face. Even soft, even 100 days under the morning pill, the woman who had signed every inspection with a secret still read her daughter like cloth. You didn't come with anybody, she said. It was not a question. It had her mother's old flat certainty in it, the same tone Kiara had used on a Mafia boss in a hospital chair. You came alone. I couldn't bring. Kiara stopped. There isn't anybody to bring. There was a man. Her mother's hand tightened, the grip coming back into it for a second, urgent. In the room where I sewed the last one, a young one, quiet, the neck. Her free hand rose and touched the side of her own throat, the left side, and Kiara's blood went to ice. He watched me finish. He knew the copper. He didn't stop them, but he told them a name. He told them to write me down as gone off, not as. The word she wanted slid away under the softness. Her hand dropped. He knew you'd come. He said the daughter reads. The room tilted. Kiara held her mother's hand and held the chair arm and held very still while the thing her mother had just said arranged itself against everything Min-jae had told her and everything he had shown her on a tablet, and it did not contradict it. It fit under it, the way a second stitch fits under a hem. He knew you'd come. He said the daughter reads. Not a coin he'd spent to find her. A road he'd built and stood at the end of, waiting. Down the hall a cartwheel squeaked. A different cart. Voices, 2 of them, coming this way, unhurried, the flat back and forth of a shift change. Wells is due her 4 o'clock. Is that log signed? Thought Marta signed it. Kiara was on her feet with the blanket in her hands before she decided to be. Her mother's eyes tracked up to her, and there was no fear in them, only the old command, the morning before she vanished voice pressing a ring into a palm. Don't let them see you chase, Gwendolyn said, low and fast. You hear me? If they see you want it, they move it. You put it down, and you walk slow, and you come back the right way. You always come back the right way. I'm not leaving you here. You're not leaving me. Her mother's mouth made something that on a better day would have been a smile. You found me. That's a different word. Go be the woman with the linens. Go on. The voices reached the day room. Kiara laid the blanket across her mother's knees, a laundry woman finishing a laundry task, and she squeezed the cool hand once, hard, and she made herself let go, and she picked up the cart handle in the hall and pushed it toward the 2 aides coming the other way, with her chin down and her steps even. They parted around the cart. One of them said, "You seen the 4 o'clock log," and Kiara lifted one shoulder, the shrug of a woman who moved cloth and didn't do logs, and they passed her, and the secure door was ahead with its wire glass, and she pushed the cart at it and waited the 3 seconds it took for someone on the far side to badge through, and she went out on the tail of a stranger's keycard into the oatmeal corridor. She got as far as the corridor split, long-term care one way, the rear dock the other, and she turned for the dock, and a man stepped out of the small office beside the memory care door and said, "Excuse me, laundry." Not a shout, smooth. The kind of voice that never had to be loud because it had never once been ignored. Kiara stopped the cart. She turned. He was tall, lean, a white coat over a gray suit, thin steel glasses, black hair cut with a ruler. A metal pen turned once between 2 fingers and went still. He did not hurry. Men who owned the ground never hurried. Hurry was for the people who might be stopped, and he had never in his life been one of them. He stood in the office doorway with the patience of a man who had watched a great many people walk into his building and understood, better than they did, that the building decided who walked back out. She had never seen his face. She knew, the way she'd known the neck in a doorway before she knew the man, exactly whose floor she'd walked onto, the name that had been the top of the building since the first sheet she folded, the name her mother's cut thread had been climbing toward the whole time. He looked at her collar, no name sewn in. He looked at the cart, at the well under the folded stack where 3 bundles were missing. He looked, last and longest, at the thin gold chain that had slipped an inch above the tunic's top button, and at the ring that hung on it, warm from her skin, catching the oatmeal light. "That's an interesting piece," Dr. Han Sung-won said. He clicked the pen once. "We don't sew names into our linens, and I know the woman who runs the co-op cart." He let that sit. "Where did you get it?" Behind him, through the wire glass, an aide was bending to sign a 4 o'clock log, and beyond her, a slide frame read, G. Wells in a clerk's plain hand, and the whole building went on being quiet in the way of places that keep people still, and Kiara Weller stood in a corridor with no van going out, and her mother's ring naked at her throat, and the man who owned the lie, looking straight at the only thread she had left. Kiara set the empty cart against the wall and folded her hands the way her mother had taught her to fold them in front of strangers who signed the checks. Slow, loose, nothing to hide in a body that has nowhere to be. "A resident left it in a bundle," she said. "I was going to hand it to the desk." Han watched her the way a man watches a seam he already knows will fail. "Our residents don't own rings anymore," he said. "We hold their valuables. It's in the intake agreement." He clicked the pen. "The families are grateful for that. It keeps things quiet. Then I'll leave it at the desk. You'll leave it with me." He put out his hand, palm up, the way a doctor asks for a chart. She looked at the hand. She thought about the flour canister 10 miles away, the twin rings sunk in it, and the 7 pairs she'd memorized so that no hand on earth could take the number by taking the metal. That was the thing about her mother's system. You could steal the object. You could not steal the reading. "No," Kiara said. The word landed in the Avea-colored hallway and did not echo. Han's face rearranged itself into patience. He glanced at the wire glass, where the 4 o'clock aide had straightened and was walking off with her clipboard, and for 1 second, his eyes went to the slide frame that read G. Wells, checking it the way you check that a door is still shut. That was when the front of the building stopped being quiet. A voice came down the long-term corridor, unhurried, official, reading a name off a page. "I'm looking for a Dr. Han. Adult Protective Services. We have a wellness order for a resident admitted under Gloria Wells." A second voice, drier, added, "And the ethics reviewer of record wants the transfer hold read into your log before anyone touches this hallway." Han did not turn right away. Kiara saw the calculation cross him. How many outside eyes, how fast, and whether any of them could be made to go home. She had seen that arithmetic run in Min-jae. She recognized the family resemblance in the arithmetic before she recognized it in the blood. Park Ji-ho came around the corner first, black coat, the small scar over his brow, and behind him a woman in a county lanyard with a folder, and behind her, Dr. Lena Ortiz, badge out, saying the words that mattered. "Gloria Wells is a person of interest in an open ethics review. She does not get medicated, moved, or discharged today, except into a documented wellness transport. That's not a request." Ji-ho did not look at Kiara, he looked at Han. "You know how this reads if you argue," he said, "so don't." Han put his pen away. He did the smallest thing a cornered man can do. He smiled and stepped back and became helpful. "Of course," he said. "There's been a mix-up with a family name. We'll straighten it at the desk." They straightened nothing at the desk. The county woman went into the room with Ortiz, and Kiara went in behind them, and Gwendolyn was sitting where Kiara had left her, with the blanket across her knees, and this time she had her name spoken out loud in a hallway by a stranger holding a form, and the name was Weller. Kiara did not run to her. She had promised the woman in the chair that she would not chase. She walked to the wheelchair the transport brought, and she put her hand under her mother's arm, the way a laundry worker helps a resident who is due somewhere, and she said, "Low, the right way, just like you said." Gwendolyn stood on legs that had forgotten they were allowed to. "You came back," she said. "I came back with them," Kiara said. That was the whole difference. That was the word. They took Gwendolyn out through the front, past the sign-in sheet, past the camera, on paper, with a signature that meant she existed. Han held the door. It was the only useful thing he did all morning, and he did it because a camera was watching him do it. In the transport van, a real one, county plates, a driver who wrote things down, Gwendolyn found her daughter's face and stayed there. "They told me you'd chase," she said. "The quiet young one. He said the daughter reads, so keep her mother, and she stays useful." She pressed her lips flat. "He wasn't wrong about you. He was wrong about why." "I know what he did," Kiara said. "You know part." Gwendolyn's hand found the chain at Kiara's throat, felt the ring through the tunic, and something in her settled. Listen to me while the pill's still thin. The young one with the neck. He didn't build the place I was in. He found it after. The man who built it stood in that hallway just now holding a door. Kiara went still. Han. Han Sing-won. Her mother said it like a splinter coming out. I inspected linens for 11 years, baby. I saw what rode under them out of 2 clinics he ran. I wrote it in copper. I was going to walk it into the right office. Her jaw worked. It wasn't the brother who cut my thread. Dae-sung came later. Dae-sung's a man who finds a river already dug and sells tickets on it. Han's the one who dug it. Han's the one who gave the order that I go quiet. Kiara turned that over. For weeks, she had built one man in her head, given him the whole crime, hung the cut thread on him because he was the one she could reach. And the whole time, the hand that gave the order had been signing intake forms in a lavender hallway, holding doors for cameras, wearing a coat instead of a knife. Han was in that hallway 2 minutes ago, she said. He held the door for you. He held it because a camera was watching him hold it. Gwendolyn's mouth went thin. That's the only reason that man ever does anything kind. There's a camera, or there's a witness, or there's a form. Take those away and you'd see what he is. She squeezed her daughter's wrist. Don't you look at me like you failed. You read it right. You just read the near hand first. The near hand's real too. It cut me, but it's not the top of the list. The brother, Kiara said. Dae-sung. Sells tickets on a river another man dug. Her mother said it again, the way you say a thing so it stays said. Remember which is which when you walk into their room. If you blame the wrong man in front of the right one walks out clean. And Min-jae. Kiara's voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. He registered you. You said a young man with the neck told them to write you down as gone off. He did. Gwendolyn nodded, slow. And the name on that door, that came from the one who fetches for him. The one with the scar. Ji-ho. She watched her daughter take it. The young one didn't hide me to hurt me. He hid me alive. Han wanted me finished. The young one made me a patient instead of a body and put me somewhere with a name close enough to mine that a reader could find it and far enough that a killer couldn't. That's a strange kind of mercy, but I've cut cloth my whole life. I know the difference between a tear and a cut. What he did to me was a cut. Cuts heal. Kiara sat with that, the way you sit with a number that changes every list under it. Ji-ho used the false name, not to bury her, to fence her off from Han, while Min-jae decided how to end the man who owned them both. Who's Sarah? Kiara said. Her mother looked at her, surprised the name had traveled. He said that to you? He said it before he said anything else that made sense. Gwendolyn folded the blanket edge over her fingers. An old habit, quality inspection with nothing to inspect. There was a girl on the second list I ever wrote. A Korean name the clerks made into Sarah for the manifest. She went under the linens out of the first clinic, and she never came up on the other side. I didn't know she was anyone's until the young one stood in that sewing room and read my copper over my shoulder and stopped breathing at the 4th knot. She was quiet a moment. She was his, younger. The river took her before he understood he was standing on the bank of it. That's why he turned. Men don't turn for principle, baby. They turn when the water takes someone with their own face. Live, Kiara thought. He had pressed her fingers around the ring and said a dead girl's name, and then he had said the one instruction he had left. Live. Not to her. Through her. To all of it. The van pulled off the service road onto pavement that had lines painted on it. The vote did not happen in a boardroom. It happened in a wide gray room in the Kang building, with a long table and old men, and one empty chair kept for a father who arrived last, small in a good coat, and it happened because Kiara walked into it holding a canvas laundry bag she had carried up herself. They had tried to keep her out. Jiho had gotten her in, because the third condition had teeth now, and the teeth belonged to an outside room. A state investigator sat along the wall with the county folder open, invited by no one in the family, and impossible to remove without answering why you'd want to. Dae-sung was already talking when she came in. He had the posture of a man who has counted the votes and likes his count. He stopped when he saw the bag. Min-jae was there, out of the robe, in the espresso suit, thinner at the jaw than the man in the hidden photograph, the dragon showing at his collar because he had stopped hiding it. He was standing, which was its own sentence. He had promised to stay reachable and responsive until it was done, and he had, and here was done, walking in on his own legs. He looked at Kiara and did not use her name and did not need to. "You'll want to sit," Kiara said to the room, "because I only brought 6 things, and each one takes a minute." She put the first square of linen on the table, copper thread in the hem, a run of knots, cut clean at 4 inches. My mother inspected linens for 2 clinics this family used to move people. She counted what she saw in thread, 1 knot, 1 number. She set down the second square, the third, 6 sheets, 6 lists. She was stopped on the 7th, 4th square, 5th. The lists are incomplete on purpose. She never got to finish them, because a man had her cut off mid-stitch and had her written into a memory ward under a name 1 letter off her own. The list's 1 letter off her own. She laid the 6th square down, and, beside it, from the chain at her throat, her mother's ring. Then, from the flour-dusted tin in the bag, the twin. "The knots only tell you where to start reading," she said. "The rest of the number is inside the ring. 2 rings, same sequence." He took one off my mother's hand. She looked at Han, who sat very straight along the far side. He didn't know she had daughters who fold laundry. He didn't know there were 2 more. She read the 7 pairs aloud, slow, the way Min-jae had made her read them the first time, and Min-jae typed them into the tablet lying on the table where the old men could watch the columns fill. 9 lines, 14. The lists that had been white for 18 months went black with names, because the key told each list where it began, and the 6 sheets told the key where it ended, and the 2 halves had never been in the same room until she carried them in. Dae-sung said, "This is a laundry worker with a story about knots." "Read the 3rd line," Kiara said, not looking up from the table. He didn't. One of the old men did, leaning to the screen, and his face changed, and the not looking around the table became its own confession. A name they knew was on the 3rd line, a supplier, a clinic address 2 of them had signed off on as freight. "This is 31 people," Kiara said, "and a girl the manifest called Sarah." The father had not spoken. He read the screen. He was old, and he had signed things in his life he had told himself were freight, and now the freight had names his own son had once carried under a linen he told himself was linen, and the room understood, the way a room understands weather, that the vote was already over. It went fast after that, the way these things do once the numbers are on the wall and not in a woman's chest. The investigator along the wall stopped being decorative. Han stood up once, smoothly, to explain a mix-up with a family name, and Ortiz's documented hold, and the county folder, and 31 filled lines made the explanation into a confession by shape. 2 men who were not Kang came in from the corridor for him. He went the way careful men go, without noise, saving the noise for later rooms and better lawyers, and it would not be enough, because his own building had logged every intake he'd ever hidden, and a woman he'd tried to erase would testify with her glasses back on. Dae-sung lost it all in an afternoon. The routes, the seat, the count he'd liked. A man who sells tickets on a river owns nothing when the river is drained. The father gave what was left of the family's clean weight to the son who had turned. on the condition read into the record that every list go, whole, to the outside room. Condition 3. Kiara had put it in the door herself, 3 days and a lifetime ago, and Ji-ho had warned that it might kill someone, and it had killed the thing the family had been. Kiara did not stay for the part where powerful men decide how to describe what happened. She went down to the county office and sat with her mother while a woman with a clipboard restored a name, and then she took Gwendolyn's glasses out of an evidence sleeve and put them back on her face herself. The wedding band came out of the same sleeve, the one Han's people had pulled from her mother's hand, the sequence still inside the ring where a stranger had thought it was decoration. Gwendolyn slid it back on without a word and flexed her fingers, checking the fit, the way she'd once checked a hem. 3 rings, Gwendolyn said. You carried 2, and I lost 1, and here it is. She almost smiled. I always did overbuild redundancy into a system. You inherit that. You taught me that. Same thing, in this family. She looked at her daughter over the rectangular frames, seeing her for the first time in 100 days, with the pill worn off and the glasses on, and her own name on the form. You didn't chase, you read. Then you came back the right way, and brought a room that couldn't be sent home. Her voice caught once and held. That's a different word than the one they wrote on my door. The eviction notice on the kitchen floor got answered by the last thing she expected, the St. Vincent basement, of all the honest places, offering her a supervisor's line over quality intake for the whole property, on merit, because a woman upstairs named Ortiz had written down in a formal file what Kiara Weller had actually done, and the hotel found it easier to promote a fact than to explain firing her. Her mother would inspect again when her hands were steady. There would be rent. There would be a felt pen with something worth crossing off. Min-jae found her in the basement, where it started, near the sorting bay. Marcus took one look and found somewhere else to be. He didn't come with a speech. He had learned, somewhere in a robe with an IV in his hand, that speeches were what men used instead of doing the thing. He stood in the blue fluorescent wash that made the sheets look drowned, and he held out his hand. Her mother's ring sat in his open palm, not closed around it, the way he'd held it that first hour, keeping it, open, given back. Sarah's list has her whole name now, he said, because your mother counted, and because you carried it in a laundry bag. A breath. I studied you before I ever spoke to you. You know that. I can't unmake it. No, Kiara said. You can't. I'm not asking you to trust the man who did that. He kept the palm open, no pressure in it, the ring just lying there, catching the bad light. I'm giving you the choice I took from you. Whatever you build with your own hands on it. If you want the ring, take it, because you decided, not because I closed your fingers. And the man who studied me, she said, what does he build now? Whatever the outside room lets me. Min-jae didn't move the hand. The ring stayed where it was, offered, no weight behind it. The lists are theirs, not the family's. I signed that away this afternoon, in front of a woman with a county folder. There's nothing left to keep you useful with. That was the point. I wanted the ring in your hand at a moment when I had no use for you at all. She heard it. The one thing a man who plans everything can't fake, giving something up when the plan is already won. She looked at the ring that had been her mother's, that had held the number that freed a name off a manifest, that she had pressed once into the palm of a man she feared, and had gotten back, and worn drowned under a green tunic, through every hour of this. She thought about thread. You don't chase the noise, you read the thread. Her mother had one more sentence past that, the one for after. You put it down, and you walk slow, and you come back the right way. She had come back the right way. She got to decide what she picked up. Kiara reached out and closed her own fingers over the ring, over the number, over his open hand, for exactly as long as it took to take what was hers and no longer. Then she let go, and the ring was on her palm, and the choosing was on her face. And neither of them said the Korean word for it, because some things you don't whisper, you keep. Start over, she said. Slow, my hands on it. Downstairs, the caldera shuddered the way it did at 11. On time, honest, moving warm water to people who would never know her name. Kiara slid the ring back onto the chain, against her own heartbeat, where a search would find it and a thief could not read it, and went back to counting sheets, because the number was hers now, and so were the hands, and so, at last, was the thread. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Tell me, my loves, have you ever recognized a truth by a single thread when everyone around you called it nothing? Have you ever been made invisible in a green uniform, only to become the one person who could open a locked hand? Mark my words, that quiet knowing costs you, even when it saves everything. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, truth, and restored justice, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel